we have a bunch of people online and we have a bunch of people in the room. I'm guessing we have a few seats empty, so people will turn up. So what I'm going to do is just mention the antitrust policy notice. You'll find the full antitrust policy on the Linux Foundation website. And if you are from a member company and you have any questions, you can ask our counsel, Andy Updegrove. Today has an agenda of a brief overview of the project status, and then we'll move into a discussion period talking about our specifications. We'll talk about automation, and we'll talk a little bit about other work that's on the project, and we'll have a space for any other business. Because this is a mini summit, what I really want to do is to get your opinions and knowledge to help guide the OpenChain project and community. When we talk about things like our specifications or automation, I'm hoping that we can brainstorm what is useful and appropriate to move forward. Some items will be things we just do in our community. Some things might be proposals for the OpenChain Governing Board. Maybe a brief overview of the project status is good. And this is the kind of Shane talks for a bit and then stops talking and you can ask questions bit. The project has seen a lot of traction.
Hello, attendees. Please join us in the auditorium for keynotes beginning now.
Owner, is that Trisha? I'm not sure. Okay, so when it comes to the project status, we've seen probably two major things happen. One is the OpenChain project has recovered on the community side pretty well from COVID in places like China, Japan, and Korea. We see a lot of meetings and activity. In Germany, we're seeing increased, I guess, activity, but less than China, Japan, and Korea. And we've been very lucky to have Marcel and his team host the German work group, which will meet again next week, immediately after the Bitkom conference in Erfurt. This is also tied into what else we do in Europe. We've got a UK work group, which is getting support from Orcro. And again, their meetings are restarting, but they have less momentum than we see in Asia. When it comes to the commercial side of OpenChain, we've seen a lot of activity with various providers coming into the ecosystem. As you know, OpenChain is a project run by user companies for user companies, but we're putting ISO standards into a very large supply chain. So the provider side of our community, our partner program, is essential. And we've seen continual expansion. For instance, now we have 13 global certifiers that assist with adoption. We've got 25 service companies, 24 law firms, and we also have quite a few of the tooling vendors around the world, most of the larger tooling vendors in our partner ecosystem. What that means in practice is that these companies are connected with us. They're official partners using our trademark in marketing material, and they help us out with various things. Like on Monday, that was Monday, I think. We had a board meeting and we took over the PwC offices in Bilbao and they gave us sandwiches, which was nice. So in short, then the community of companies using the standard and the community of companies supporting the standard is bouncing back from COVID, and that's nice. We're going to go into more detail on it in a minute, but we've also seen very practical activities increasing. We've seen our reference material, including core material like the training slides, getting updates. We've seen editing of our standards moving very rapidly. Good morning, King. Not at all. And we've also seen activities that are new. For instance, we've seen several new subgroups start in Japan on various topics. We've also seen previous activities return to form and contribute to other projects. One of the things you might or might not know is that OpenChain, via the Japan work group, is responsible for SPDX Lite. So SPDX Lite was in the OpenChain, the SPDX second generation standard, and the Japan work group has prepared it for the third one. Kubota-san, is SPDX Lite 3.0 accepted into the main SPDX 3.0 or still a proposal? Yeah. Yes. And this will be a profile, I believe, right? Yeah. For those of you who aren't familiar, SPDX Lite 3 is not a monolithic thing. It's different profiles like licensing, security, AI, and or SPDX Lite. We're lucky to have Gary at this table who's deeply involved in SPDX and also automation around it. Gary, I've got a question about this. Is SPDX 3.0 partially supported in existing tooling, or is that, coming later? What's happening on the tooling front?
Not our first release candidate, and one of the goals is to enable the tooling to start under development.
Right.
The one that's farthest along is the Python tools.
Okay.
So it's a prototype at this point. Also because the learn from the implementation, we need to make them standard. So I think it'll be a little while before they're fully supported, but
Right.
we are getting some tooling being done. Now the tools are also under development. There's one other tool that isn't part of the tooling that I did.
It's someone else. I mean, this is really good news because as I understand it, 3.0 is coming to market, but it's not there yet. So if we have prototyping in Python, it's already a nice step forward. And we, OpenChain never picks, sides on the how front. So there's other software bill of materials like Cyclone and Market, but SPDX is, I think I'd say, the most common thing in our community. So we will be messaging that the prototyping's there on automation. Automation, Helio's not here today, but yeah, Helio, one of my board members, he's from Volkswagen, Cariad, was emphasizing recently about the way that the first thing that companies really need on getting things better once they have our ISO standard is automate as much as possible. And SPDX 3 automation around that will be a big question mark. So it's really good to know. Speaking of automation, we're going to have a section on it, and I really need your input on what we do as OpenChain for automation, because we've done reference activities, we've done discussions on it, but there's a real, I think, market gap right now where we have projects with automation. I mean, if you want SPDX automation, you go to SPDX, right? You can start there. But if you want general automation, where do you start? What are the capabilities? This is something that's hard to find out. Another question on this, and it's related to software bill of materials, is there translation between SPDX and Cyclone at the moment? Does anyone do that?
Yes, I maintain Cyclone UX SPDX converter, and there is a couple of people in the Cyclone UX community that support translations going the other way.
Okay.
So either one of them are up to the latest spec. Like they don't support the 3.0 yet, and
Right.
Not supporting on Cyclone yet, but I think it does cover what's mostly in use in the community today. So
That's really good news because we are seeing, and this is a general observation, as we have meetings, like we had the Germany work group meetings, we've had meetings in Japan, there are some different choices. Some people are using SPDX, some people are using Cyclone, and some people are forking the standards and making their own mixes. So, I know. It's like the old joke, someone sees a bunch of standards and they're like, we need to fix that, so they make another standard. But it's really heartening to know the translation is there. So once people have their own choice, even if they're suppliers of something different, you can communicate the key material through the supply chain. So okay, that's really good news. And I think what we should do is dive into the main thing that we do. Automation is an implementation thing, it's a how thing. We need to guide people there, but what we do is what. And with what, we're setting the tone for business process management around open source. We focus on license compliance, and security. I think I should give you a general update that our license compliance standard is going further and further in the supply chain, which is great. It's been in market 3 years, almost 4 years. And we have a security standard, which has gone through ISO balloting. And for those of you who don't know, the security standard has passed all the balloting. We're just waiting for the ISO publication. There's a part of the ISO org called ITTF, and they have to press publish on their website. What is great is that that means there's no barriers for us. ISO 18974 OpenChain security is done. What is not great is they don't know when they're going to hit publish yet. They've put us into a publication block and they were like, October until January? I don't know. That's simplifying it a bit, and I'm sure we'll get the messaging clarified, and we'll probably come to market much sooner rather than later. Last time when we did the licensing spec, as soon as we finished our edits and everything was done, we were published within a week or two. So it was a bit of a surprise that this time they have a publication backlog. It seems it's more of an administration issue, and a whole bunch of standards are in that backlog. I imagine there's two reasons for this. One is COVID didn't help, and two is, as you may know, standards orgs have been evolving. People like us doing open source standards have changed the standardization landscape. And that also meant that personnel who were doing standardization before are rotating into different parts of businesses. And standard orgs really depend on a lot of the companies to lend people into the processes. In other words, it's slightly irritating to have an unknown publication date that appears to be 1 to 2 months after we've done everything, at least. But it's not totally surprising. And what we're going to do is we're going to keep asking JDF, when's ITTF going to do this? When's ITTF going to do this? And eventually we'll wear them down. They'll just do it. I'm hopeful we'll be out in October, but I need Joint Development Foundation to give me messaging on the exact date. Anyway, with that security standard, it transfers our project from essentially being a license compliance project into more generally business process standardization. And we're preparing all of the marketing and PR on our side. We're working with partners about how the security spec will be messaged around the world. We've already seen adoption of it as a de facto standard, companies like BlackBerry and LG. And we expect that once it becomes an ISO standard, just like licensing, we'll see a lot of announcements. Okay, that long preamble is because the licensing standard and the security standard are both expected to be ISO standards in play in the market this year. I mean, the latest that ITTF would publish us, they said, is in January, but we expect, quite frankly, to be out a lot before that. That means we have two ISO standards in market, but for us at this table, the important thing is that we're already editing the next generations. So we have a process where we have calls every 2 weeks, one for Europe and America, one for America, Asia, and we're editing the next generation proposal for licensing and the next generation proposal for security. Licensing is no surprise. We went to market in 2020 after finishing in 2019. So we're looking at 4 to 5 years. Security might be surprising because we're just getting that standard to market. Working on the next generations doesn't mean we're publishing right away, but it does mean we're taking feedback into account, and then it will go to our steering committee, which has our board chairs and our platinum members, our governing board members, analyzing proposals. In the last 5 years, we've had some really good ideas for clarifying the license compliance standard. We've also had some suggestions for scope increases or changes. On the security side, for those of you who are new, when we started doing security, we went to security experts, and that included going to ISO Working Group Subcommittee 27, Information and Communication Technology. And we basically asked them, does our security standard contradict anything you're doing? Are there any editorial things you want to send back to us as a courtesy? So they sent back some really good editorial notes and clarifications. They also cheerfully sent a ton of scope suggestions. So, we immediately said, that's nice, scope is next time. But that meant that we already had a ton of things to process for proposed future security scope changes. How many of you here are aware of the editing process for the next generation standards? Just a quick straw poll. It's like 3 people, including my chairperson. That sucks. It's on the OpenChain monthly calls, and everyone is welcome. But the really important point is that the next generation specs are on GitHub, and everything is being done with GitHub issues. And you can already see the draft specs. So licensing would be 3rd generation, and security would be 2nd generation. So if you have access to our Zoom, you will find in the chat all the links to this. If you don't have access to our Zoom, you can go to the OpenChain GitHub project space, and you'll find the licensing and security repos. Now, the formal process when we do standards like this is the community finishes something and says, I think this is done, this standard looks good, and then it goes to the steering committee, which reviews it. The steering committee will then either quickly say we like it, quickly say we hate it, or more likely say we want to discuss some things or alter some things. Once the steering committee decides they like an update to our standard, if they vote yes, then we send it to ISO and the update goes through probably in a matter of a couple of months. One thing I wanted to just bring to the table, and this is something that I think my Japanese colleagues and I have discussed quite a lot, is that for large companies, it is a very long cycle in procurement to put a standard in market. So, a company like Sony is making a lot of consumer stuff, but a company like Toshiba is making infrastructure stuff. And an infrastructure procurement cycle can take a long time. If I recall correctly, the team from Hitachi told me that, the procurement cycle on, for instance, the Shinkansen train is years, and then the support cycle is decades. It's about 30 to 40 years for the Shinkansen, and if they build a power station, it's 50 to 80 years. So no one wants us to keep changing ISO standards quickly. So we have to be cautious. And our main goal is to put the ISO standards into procurement. It goes through these contracts and it takes years. So the next generation licensing, editing, security editing means we take the ideas in, but it doesn't mean that we have a plan to revert ISO standards every year or something like that. But it's vitally important that you know this so you can contribute. As an open project, we want to make very clear there's no barrier to anyone contributing. And we've had all types of stakeholders jump in. So we've had, for instance, CAICT from the Chinese government provide really good input on scoping on security. We've had corporations from all over the world lend ideas from different market verticals, from finance to defense, on how we can talk about things. And equally important, we've had people point out language. We've had most of our community is non-native English speakers, but our standards are in English. And that means we've made all kinds of horrific mistakes with unclear sentences and assumptions. Yeah. So Jimmy, I think that's when it comes to the next meeting of the steering committee, we socialized probably in December with the board meeting. So that will be very early December. The governing board will meet. We'll have a steering committee at the same time. The steering committee meeting will give votes to the board members and the chairs of specification. We've got co-chairs. So we've got Chris Wood from Lockheed Martin and Helio from Cariat. But all of you can watch the steering committee meeting. It's open, right? You can see how it debates whether we go with the standards or not. If not, why not? What do we do, et cetera, et cetera. And then we'll put that on GitHub. If you need to trace how we've got here, our mailing lists are public. The GitHub obviously is public, and we also have slides from every meeting archived. So that should mean that you have full traceability. And if you want to go all the way back on how we made any of our standards, if you look at our specification mailing list all the way back to, I think, early 2016, you'll see how we drafted the very first ideas for licensing that came all the way here. This is a little bit unusual in the sheer amount of data we provide, but that's purposeful to make sure that these open standards are truly open. Just pause here and see if you've got any questions about this. Everyone's like, it's the third day of the conference or fourth day. It's morning. It's 9 a.m. We don't care. That's a valid point. That's a really good question, Carl Eric. In the beginning, we basically said that we have no fixed schedule, but in principle, updates around every 5 years may be something that would be nice and steady. In some fields like security, we might need to do an update faster because a lot of the landscape is changing, new regulations and so on. The thing with the ISO standards is that, for instance, license compliance is ISO 5230, but its full name is OpenChain ISO IEC 5230:2020. So most companies will be using this 2020 variant probably until the end of this decade. If we update it, it doesn't invalidate the 2020 variant. Then it would just be a new one, like ISO 5230:2024, 2025, that people could introduce into the procurement cycle. And correct me if I'm wrong, Gary, this is also what's expected with SPDX, like 5962 2021 is SPDX 2.2 or something. Yeah. And this new one, SPDX 3, will be 2.2.1. Oh, that's just like us. I think our ISO standard is the one for licensing compliance, if I recall correctly, is OpenChain 2.1 is ISO 5230. Anyway, never mind. Just use the ISO numbers. But I mean, this means that people will probably be using 5962 2021, so SPDX 2.2.1 for a long time, even though we'll have ISO 5962 colon, say 2024 in market as well.
Which is important for the tooling people because
Yeah.
you want to make sure you always support the ISO version.
Yes.
We've had people update their tools to 2.2 or to 2.3 and not support 2.2.1.
Oh,
No,
that's a really good point. That's actually, fundamentally the reason we do the ISO standards is so that very different departments can target something that they all organically know. And having optional support for, let's say, SPDX 2.3, the first step should probably be SPDX 2.2.1, ISO 5962, 2021. How sad a world it is that I've memorized so many ISO numbers. God, what has happened to me? It used to be more fun. I have heard that more and more tooling vendors, for example, are supporting SPDX. I was talking with companies like Scan OSS and Foss ID and so on. And ingest and export is not universal in tooling, but I think ingest is getting very, very common. And with the same for OpenChain process management, scanning is only one part of automation. Really, we are in software asset management. We're part of the software asset management processes. And I notice a lot of companies are talking automation on this. Whether it's implemented or planned, it's very common. So, Mary, you mentioned that at Volvo, you're thinking about how to automate as much as possible. Try to. So if I recall correctly, you mentioned that sort of your vision is if it's a repeatable task, if possible, automate it. If it's a task you'd have to do again and again, ideally you want to automate it, no matter what that is. Yeah.
Try to. Because if you look at the process, you will feel it's endless continuous improvement.
Yes.
It's like after a while, you always feel something like Amazon, for example, they have been run this for 16 years, but just continue to improve the process.
Yes.
So
Could I suggest that you try and repeat that for people listening on?
Absolutely. So Mary, director of open source at Volvo, was just saying that every repeatable task is something that she'd like to automate. And companies like Amazon, 16 years in the open source management arena, have been also focusing on that as well. But it's a process itself. You're never finished. This is, I think, all pretty positive. Does anyone have any questions about our licensing and security standards?
I have a question, but I haven't do the enough homework yet, but I think it's good to ask. It's about, maybe it's not about your ISO standard, it's also about the practical, for security, but it's kind of part of the cybersecurity team governance. It seems like a little bit conflict with also the cybersecurity team.
So, Mary, if I understand it correctly, you're asking how does it work when there's a security standard? Does it belong under the OSPO team or the security team? It seems to be an overlap. I think that's a very valid question, and the answer is that we have to remember that an OSPO is an implementation choice. That's all. From our perspective, we're about what on the process management. So OpenChain itself doesn't care if an OSPO is implementing something or someone else is implementing it. We have no opinion on that. And this is purposeful. A lot of companies are now using OSPOs, but a lot of companies don't. So a lot of companies manage open source via the IP department, or they manage it through a mixture of departments. So from our perspective, the important point is that there are processes to manage open source that are as universal as possible. So if you're doing compliance, here are the key requirements of a quality program. If you're doing security, here are the key requirements of a quality program. The decision of where they belong, or let's say tensions between an OSPO and a security department over who owns it, it's a different matter. But it's a really good question. And I think the answer is that ultimately both departments will be collaborating. An OSPO is an expertise area for open source that we can't really expect security to have. But likewise, security is really, really good at security implementation. So it's probably a case where the owner will have to be decided by the company, but in practice, the two departments will collaborate. For those of you who aren't familiar, a lot of OSPOs do open source license compliance, and they do automation on it. So they're doing the scanning, but a lot of security teams are doing the security scanning. And sometimes inside companies, that can lead to tensions and very polite budget arguments. Who gets the money? But again, we don't care. OpenChain is what, not how. Implementation is someone else's business. We provide reference material on that, but we are not determining a winner in the implementation market. And there's a really, really, really important reason for that. We build ISO standards. We can't choose winners, including on how. That has to be left to the market to determine. Other projects can be more normative. They're not standardization project. So for example, To-Do Group is very clear that they think OSPOs should manage open source, and they explain how and why and the value and the efficiency. They can be normative because they're not building a standard. If you're building an ISO standard, you have to have a way that people who disagree completely on implementation can still use the standard. Of course, everyone in OpenChain thinks open source is a great idea, and the vast majority think that having open source experts deal with open source is a good idea. But we don't include that in our standardization. It's an important distinction, and you'll see it playing out. For instance, as we talk about updating our standards, you'll see proposals that are normative, where people go from what, like have a process, have training, have a policy, into how. Your policy should say this. this type of thing. And you'll see those discussions appear, and you'll always see us say, nope. But we do have reference material that is more normative, and we do point people to projects. This is also why, for instance, we say have a software bill of materials, and then we stop. We don't say use SPDX. We cite SPDX as an example of software bill of materials, but it's not our business. In fact, it cannot be our business to tell people to use an implementation choice. And we're sister standards. So, bear this in mind. It's a distinction and it's very important. So Mary, yeah, you're quite right. There is a certain tension, but it's on the how level, and we have to not take a opinion on that. But the guidance we have is, security and OSPO obviously can work together, and that's a great idea. We've also had that in other areas. OSPO's doing open source encounter questions like, what do we do with export control? And the obvious answer is ask your export control department. But at the same time, we have a work group that's, after finding reference material explaining export control from academics. And it's in open source, it's usually encryption, and there's a certain level of encryption that triggers export control. And that kind of knowledge helps OSPOs realize, when do you normally have to go to the export control department and say help? And if you're doing that, what type of language will the export control department be speaking? Okay. The more juicy part of standardization is that there's proposals for new standards. There's ideas about new standards. And one that came up and is quite advanced is that our telco work group has an SBOM quality proposal about how to determine what's a quality SBOM to use. And the chair of telco is right here, Makiton from Nokia. Can you tell us a little bit more about the telco SBOM proposal and the status and how it works?
Yes, the work was started by Jim, and he resigned. I took the chair after that. So we wanted to have a common SBOM standard for communicating SBOMs between telcos, their suppliers, and their providers. So we met with several companies in the telco field, and we tried to determine what the SBOM should look like. So it was a collaborative work, and we managed to have a stable version that was approved in the work group in the last weeks. So what is kind of funny is that finally we were discussing within telco groups, but we didn't find things that were really specific to telecommunication companies. So we have a proposal for quality SBOM. It's based on ISO SPDX. So it is standard. Gives the fields that we consider mandatory, but we give also other consideration on the SBOM, on when it should be produced, on when it should be provided, and so on. So you can have a look at it. It's available on the GitHub from OpenChain.
It's very interesting, the sequence where the telco group met to discuss what might our industry need for telco assessment for the SBOM, and you've accidentally on purpose created a potential universal assessment, which is pretty good. So for those of you who are curious, how does this work now that, let's say, the telco work group has this document? Formally speaking, we now have a draft proposal for a specification. And if the steering committee of OpenChain accepts that draft proposal, then it becomes an OpenChain specification or a de facto standard. And then after that, it can be optionally submitted into ISO and become an ISO standard. Of course, other things can happen. For instance, the steering committee of OpenChain could look at it and say, that's awesome, but it's not core to our activity. And then it could spin out somewhere else. All of these items are on the table. So the current status is the telco work group, a week or two ago, I think, basically said we're done probably. This looks ready. The 1.0 is ready. And the next question will be to take it to the wider community and people give input and say, well, telco, I agree that looks ready. Let's bring it to steering committee. Or perhaps the wider group will say, that looks great, telco, but we think it should have more before it goes to the steering committee, or less.
Yes, I really would like to have more inputs and more appreciation of what we have done.
Yes.
We had many discussions inside the work group, but
Yes.
that's so many people approved. We can have of course people
More eyes, yeah. And one thing that was cool, I noticed, is that one of our colleagues at KDDI translated it into Japanese very quickly. So the proposals were translated into Japanese. So you can read it in English or Japanese right now to see the draft. We'll be sharing the telco's work product with the global community. I think there's already one or two questions. I see Jimmy wrote down one.
Do you want me to?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I think that when we had the idea to start this group, it's as many good inventions, it comes from laziness. The fact that lawyers are expensive. I don't want my lawyers to need to negotiate the format that I want my SBOM supplied in, or the format I'm going to supply my SBOM in. And that goes beyond, is it going to be SPDX or Cyclone DX? It's, I need this information. You could implement it in SPDX in the following fashion, and then I want it that way. Or I want it delivered, just a very basic thing. I want it delivered no later than with the delivery of the software, right? You could send it to me beforehand, that's great, but I want it delivered no later than at the point of that. That's a maturity thing. But having an external reference to point to, saying this is the industry agreed way we're going to do this in, is extremely useful in those cases. But I think it's taken us a while to get to this steady version. I think it's good, but there might be other questions we need to look at for this version or a future version. For example, have we properly considered compatibility with CRA, for example? That's complicated by the fact that we don't exactly know what CRA is going to be. But is that something that needs to be considered for this or a future version? And what other thinking is the next way that we add a module for Cyclone DX in there. Currently, it describes how we would like to see if you do it in SPDX, this is how we would like to see it. We don't have that for Cyclone DX. Is that worthwhile? I don't know. That's just sort of thinkings on how this could be updated, especially with the consideration that we are on the what, not how. This might be more prescriptive than it should be if we want to go to ISO. It can certainly be this descriptive if we say an OpenChain product, but if we see value in ISO in the future, do we need to update with that modularity? That's
a very good point. And just for reference around the table, a standard can have a reference implementation. So for example, if the telco spec, everyone loved it and everyone said, let's make it a universal SBOM quality spec. We don't have to include reference implementations for every SBOM. So for example, we could stick with SPDX as a reference implementation, but we couldn't possibly exclude people using another thing. On the other hand, there's a very strong argument that if there's, implementation standards that are popular around the market, include examples of those in different reference implementations for the sake of companies. So it's genuinely a question for people to talk through and see what the market needs. Now, if I recall, the telco spec, the definition of the quality SBOM includes not just reference to SPDX, but also the NTIA requirements.
Yes.
So,
Yes, we do.
yeah. So fundamentally, it's basically some minimal requirements which are identified as SPDX fields as the example, plus NTIA requirements, which are a pretty hard requirement for the market. Yeah. King.
Right. Okay. I think now we talk about just on the open source code standard. Do you think about the AI standard? Yeah, OpenChain defines OpenChain defines the OSS compliance process. SPDX defines the metadata of OSS. What do you think about the AI? SPDX, the AI bomb on 3.0. Let's take OpenChain. We can define the AI process of how to develop AI.
Yes.
Maybe the next standard. AI is really famous now. We don't jump AI. We must open our heart. Heart AI. Yeah. What's the yeah.
A really good question, King. What about AI? And it's perfectly timed because it's on my slide. And also, it's a community discussion. No, it's perfect. So AI has really come up recently. Bear in mind, we are business process management. We focus on open source business process management. And right now, there's a lot happening around AI, which is related to open source and kind of open source. So one example is we have open source AI models and we have open data sets attached with models, but we also have kind of open source models like the most recent Facebook release, which is basically open source until you hit a certain user level. In the case of Llama 2, you hit 700 million users, you're now in a commercial contract discussion. Now you have to manage these things because the whole supply chain will be filled with AI product. People will be delivering things into the supply chain with AI. A lot of it will be based on open source or very close to open source AI technologies, and we will have to process manage it. So it looks like AI compliance process management, let's say particularly open source AI compliance process management or kind of open source AI is a really hot topic. And with SPDX supporting AI profiles, suddenly we have a software bill of materials which will help describe AI. And that leaves a market gap of, we have a software bill of materials. What's the process to manage that? So I think that's a real discussion. Do we make an open source AI compliance process spec, which could also be repurposed for other AI compliance, right? So, yeah. The challenge we have is that the whole world doesn't yet know what is necessary to comply with AI compliance, particularly because regulation is moving very, very fast. So open source compliance and let's say open source security, all of these things, regulations took decades. With AI, it's taking years. So King, to your point, I think we're going to have several proposals for AI compliance process management as a spec. And I would suggest, and I'd love your thoughts, that we probably open a study group. A study group would be, a work group is implementing something. A study group would be analyzing it. So we can see what the market compliance requirement would be. And once we have that, we would move to a work group about, okay, now we know what the problem is. What processes are needed to solve it?
I think we need to analyze
Yes.
AI. AI open source, we have an organization named OSI. they define which licenses open source license. But AI, we don't have the organization to define which is AI license.
Right.
And AI, there is a this license, but we must like I translation on the SPDX Mini-Summit. That's the picture. That's the word is public, but you can't you can't search the you can't sorry trace the copyright
Yes.
of the source. You know, it's really hard. I think the AI development is also not static now. It's changing very fast. And I agree with you, Shen. We can research on AI when it becomes stable. Define
Implement.
yes.
And for those of you who don't know, King is one of my board members, and he's from Huawei, which has been huge in AI way before everyone got excited with ChatGPT. So things like the SPDX AI profile owe a lot to contributions from Huawei, who've been analyzing this. In the Chinese market, in case you're not aware, the tools in play are incredibly sophisticated. Things like WeChat and so on offer an amazing amount of services. So Elon Musk is drinking too much coffee and, and saying things like he wants to make this everything app. It's already there in WeChat. You can do everything from your banking to your loans to sending money to your friends, ordering a taxi, whatever. And it's got 1.2 or 3 billion users on WeChat alone, if I recall. So anyway, this kind of stuff is using things like AI, and this means China has been way ahead of us in thinking through this. And this means that, as King said, the problem isn't fully defined yet, but in markets where AI has been in deployment longer, I think there's a clear understanding that we need to do more and more here. And that's why, the AI profile in SPDX is important. If we start a study group on this, we can bring in other experts. I actually talked with Abraham from LFAI and Data, and he's very amenable to talking with us.
And single LCI's process.
Yeah.
Abraham and other guys, some of them also come from China, like we talk ZTE, like very time, maybe you know that.
Of course.
So now define what is what group under the algorithm. Let's find four groups. One is standard. The other is big set.
Yes.
Third is model. And that's also maybe education or training. Yeah, it's just the two slides. Go to the chair.
Right.
Yeah, and they define for what group. They think it must define the scope of the group, the responsibility of the group, what they do done. Yes, and goal of the group. This is the what to think update the process in as. Sorry, I don't have enough time to talk at this time. Even I don't know whether this come here. Yeah.
It's hard. Yeah, and LFAI and Data is, I'm not sure if they've done it yet or they're just talking about it, going to introduce or want to introduce potential analysis of degrees of openness for AI models. Is the model itself an open source license? Is the data set under open data licenses? But bear in mind, LFAI and Data is working on implementation. Like they're showing various AI models, they're hosting AI models, they're talking about how to manage AI models. They're all about how, which is why potentially we're going to look at the what. What's the quality process management at a high level? Yeah, so probably that discussion will have a study group underway, and that study group will be open to everyone as usual. Now, obviously, for those of you who currently don't use AI, it might seem a bit sideways, but the integration is very rapid. As you might know, for instance, the Microsoft products are using ChatGPT extensively, rapidly. And we expect to see that across a great deal of products in the near future. Does anyone have any questions about AI compliance and open source? Everyone's like, no. Again, I don't care. It's the day 4 morning.
We can search for data and we can simply put.
Yes, please do. I mean, it looks like we will spend some time defining the problem and then before we can define the solution. But OpenChain has a history of being very quick to market. Once we know what the problem is, we can make a proposal very quickly for the process management. And if our steering committee approves it, then we have the potential to release specifications relatively quickly. So hopefully we can do something in service of the industry. Yeah.
I mean, it says potential standards. But what will be the next step?
Yep.
for AI? So will there be a working group set up?
First part will be a study group, so purely to talk about what is the problem scope. And then once there's a problem scoping that we would have consensus on, then there would be a working group to say, if this is the problem, what are the very high level processes to manage the problem? So it's a little bit slower than something like license compliance where the problem was very clear. But yeah, would there be a study group? And it would be very similar to working group meetings, maybe once a month or similar. But the whole purpose would be define the problem today. And we'd rely on data from companies like Huawei to come to us and say, here's the scope of the challenge as we see it. And different companies will have different opinions.
But is it still up for discussion? Is the study group will be established?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's
This is decided by the board.
the study group establishment, as I understand it, Jimmy, I think we have relative consensus that a study group will probably happen, right? But the board
Yes.
will be meeting monthly, so we can double check that next month.
Yeah, I think the consensus that we had was that it would happen, but I think we should get back and double check that on sort of the study group.
Yeah.
I think we had a developing consensus during the board meeting, then we had a strategy session that wasn't formally part of the board meeting, where that consensus further developed. But I think it seems fairly safe to assume that we have the study group.
So we'll be able to probably confirm this, and we also have to talk to Abraham in more detail to make sure that we're not going to overlap with LFI, AI and data. But within 1 month, we should know if there's going to be a study group. And that means we would probably hypothetically launch in late October and have a first meeting, a kickoff meeting then. Yeah, so this is on the table. There's another proposal, which is a community process for, a contribution process specification proposal. And this is something that Jimmy brought to the table, actually. Would you be okay to explain some of your thinking behind the proposal? So,
Sure, absolutely. So the thinking is really that it could be in the same way it's was beneficial for us to harmonize around compliance practices. It might be beneficial for some companies coming into the open source space. Their immediate concern might not be license compliance, where they already have a fairly good hand on that, but now they want to take their next journey on open source, seeing that we need to start contributing. But many companies, sort of especially my own very process-heavy company, think that this is kind of scary. We don't understand how we do this. We don't understand what things do we need to do this in a safe way. What's the standard industry practice way to start contributing? Do we need checks, balances, controls? So then having an ISO standard, it doesn't change how fundamentally we think about contributions now. We do contributions, but what it does is ensure upper management that this is not scary. Look, there's an ISO standard for it. It's probably the most boring thing ever, right? If there's an ISO standard, then how dangerous can this thing be? And we're ensured that we're not doing anything strange here. Everyone is doing it. We're following best practices. And it could be really super high level, essentially. If you want to do contributions, and okay, you should have a policy for contributions. That policy might be everyone is free to do whatever they want. That's fine. That's a valid policy. Some companies want more degrees of control. So saying you need approval. okay, if your policy is that you need approval to do this, that comes then with a number of, in my mind at least, comes with a number of other things. You need somewhere to store those approvals. So you need to store them so you can track them. And that's not because you want to go over those and look for it. It's really for the developers as well, for them to feel comfortable that, yes, someone has approved me to do this, and I can go back if someone goes after me and says, why did you contribute this? Well, I had this approval. It's stored here. It's verifiable that I could do this. I know for our own case, in Ericsson, we scan GitHub for uploads of Ericsson code or uploads of code by Ericsson emails. And if you upload, and the first time you do it, you will get an email saying, oh, do you have the proper authorization for doing that? So for us, it's super important that those developers can go back and say, yes, it's stored here. Here's my approval for that. Or I have this exception, or it's for this project that we have said all contributions are okay in this project. So having that, it creates sort of certainty both among the developer community we have, but it's also sort of among the management community that we understand how to manage this, right? So for me, it's a way of furthering the license compliance as well, because if you come into sort of our OpenChain community and you either pick up the security spec because that's your main concern, okay. If that's a good spec, so that's going to prove valuable. Then you're going to look, okay, what else is of value here? Oh, the license compliance spec. I'm going to pick that up as well and get adoption for that. And oh, or if my immediate concern is contribution, that's what I want to start doing. I pick that up. That provides value. Then you will probably pick up all of them eventually. So building out an ecosystem around this. And of course, there is value for the larger open source community in the contribution process as well. If it leads to more contributions, that's a value, but it also means that sort of whatever contributions comes in from a company that follows this, we can be reasonably sure that they're not going to try to claw back this. It's not going to create, bad feelings essentially, because it probably followed the process, it's been approved and so forth. So we can be sure that we can safely integrate this. We can feel comfortable to that degree. So that was in short the idea, but
Yeah.
Why do we need a contribution spec? It has nothing to do with license compliance. Why do we need this?
I don't know. This actually isn't something completely out of the blue, because section 3.5 of our ISO standard 5230 says if you're going to look at contribution, have a policy, and then we stop. So this is basically taking that and saying, what if we have a proposal for a sister specification that picks up from the have a policy and then says, have a process, have named people, have training, goes into a little more detail. There's some indications of market demand. For instance, Mary from Continental said that they're doing contribution right now and they'd like to have some more guidance. Just like telco, just like AI, contribution is a proposal that is being talked through, and that proposal will eventually go in front of the steering committee and so on for decisions. Just like telco, just like AI, the final OpenChain work product is undetermined. In other words, we could go in every direction. We could end up making a guide, we can end up making a specification, etc., etc. What is important is that these proposals are on the table for discussion and you are part of that discussion. So, people are having ideas and everyone can contribute to those ideas and we'll see where we go. Are there any questions at this point?
Like one question. What's the growth? So contributing NT seems probably the support contribution. But the contribution is a broad means for the system, right? Like hosting the events or maintenance site and so on. Why in this contribution MD exists on the code?
Code contribution. That's a really good question, Ninjoji-san. So Ninjoji-san's question was, why is the current discussion on contribution focused solely on code and not on other aspects like having events or sponsorship? The answer is that OpenChain is essentially about risk management. So for us, the whole the whole kind of starting concept is how do we reduce corporate risk? How do we contain corporate risk in the supply chain? How do we build trust in the supply chain? So the key risk around contribution is basically intellectual property transfer. So things like hosting an event or sponsoring an event don't immediately present a risk to the company in the supply chain perspective. They're basically a marketing activity. But from a supply chain and intellectual property management perspective, code contribution is immediately something you think, yeah, maybe there's a risk here. Maybe we could see our company or our supplier company releasing code that could make intellectual property ownership and transfer unclear. So that would be why the contribution from our optic is very narrowly scoped. So it's about what? My company, OpenChain, my company is concerned about trusted supply chain. We basically focus on risk in the supply chain, and therefore it's intellectual property transfer. But if you want to get into detail of contribution, how do you engage with the community? What are all of the options? That's sort of moving down into the how level. How do you work with a community? Maybe you sponsor events, maybe you host meetings. And that's very much a to-do group style thing. The how to do the community. Would be what about process management for risk containment? Have a process to check what code is being contributed. Have a process to authorize people to contribute code. So very much on the trust based on risk management business process, and then how to engage with the community to do group. Because it's kind of normative. Normative would be opinionated. To say that good community relationship would be to sponsor or host events. It's equally true to say you can contribute upstream some driver fixes, never talk to the community, never sponsor an event, never help anyone. But yet you might contribute some code. And that's also a valid corporate policy, not necessarily the most efficient one, but valid. So it's like this goes down one level, goes from risk containment, business process management into once we've decided to contribute, once we've got a process to contribute, what kind of things do we do? How do we do the contribution management, the relationship management? And that's very much to-do group.
Your perfect explanation. So why we need this contributor MD separately from the 130?
Oh,
The big
yeah.
one actually is the interpretation of the contribution of 15330. That is okay if the organization has no contribution policy.
Yes.
But documented, it's okay.
Yep.
My interpretation is right.
Yeah, no, that's a very valid point.
What is the relation relevant to this contribution MD and 5230? I'm sorry, I couldn't really call it.
No, you're absolutely right. The contribution process proposal is basically to say, in the very short version, we currently ask in our ISO standard have a policy and then we stop. Should we have more indications of contribution process management? And that could lead to a proposal for a new specification, or it could lead to a proposal to add something to 5230, or it could lead to us saying there's nothing to do here, or we'll just send this note to do group. So it's just a proposal to talk about it.
One impression is motivating everything is something guide to the interpretation of the contribution. So I know it's why this would be yeah.
Let me jump on this one because I'm actually living daily, day by day in this. I'm on the record, doing development, doing all the parts. Yeah. Since the contribution in the part, we as the core developers of that project wants to have this. It's nothing to do about the guidelines of should be on this way. It's the way that we want our project goes and be developed. So That's completely different. So there's two different codes that I touch right now, the SW60 and 40, and then completely different. The contribution rules are decided differently by their communities. So jumping in heaven and try to do specification, it's a minefield because you're really touching the side with the people that are doing things without understanding how we do it.
Yep.
And we should not, because the ones that decided how it's contributed is the developers, not us, not creating a specification. The idea of policies of compliance, fine. Contribution, we are touching a very, very delicate thing to alienate the only guys that actually doing the work, the developers. So the contributed is something that created for developers for the project, not some big organization trying to dedicate something that could be the rules. It will help for someone that started, but not for someone that exists today. So that's why this is a very controversial proposal because
Yes.
it will touch exactly the people that we not talk. So see, we not talk with these people. I talk because I do development all in my own day, but we not. So we really don't understand what they really mean. So if you really want to push ahead this discussion, you need to put down the core contributors for some projects and start speaking this talk with them, not with us.
And this is exactly why a proposal like this is only a proposal well before it gets to be anything like a spec. So at this stage, formally speaking, this proposal is just an idea to be chatted about. It is not a specification. It's a proposal that we make a discussion to have a potential specification. So it's just an idea. Do
So that's the future of it come to the eyes of some.
no, this is not a specification.
This community.
This is not something for the community. This is not even done. This is a proposal. The proposal would have to be finished. Then the proposal would have to go to the steering committee. Then, if the steering committee liked it, it would be a specification for this community. And then the steering committee could decide to make it an ISO standard. At this juncture, to be clear, the contribution proposal is nothing. It's a proposal only. It is not a specification. It's just a proposal that we consider making a specification. It's technically the same for telco. It's finished as a proposal. It's only a proposal. Remember, nothing is a specification until our steering committee votes. So it's just an idea. And as Helio said, and as you pointed out, it's controversial. So a very valid outcome from looking at this proposal is no. But the point is that we have a space to discuss the proposal. And because we already have in the licensing spec something that says have a policy, maybe our discussion goes through lots of points, and then we come back and say, we already had enough. There's nothing for us to do here. So it's just a discussion, but it's a formal process for a discussion where the community gets to work on a proposal. We record it on GitHub so that people can see what the discussion was. And this means if, for example, we accept it, they can see the justification, or if we reject it, they can see the justification. So people can come in 5 years later and see why we accepted or rejected something, and they can see all the points raised. So it's really transparency. And the difference between, for instance, doing that in meetings like this only is that time zones and access are very different. So by doing it in GitHub, by doing it on our mailing list, anyone in the world, anywhere can track it. But it's not for this community yet. It's only a proposal. And as Helio said, the proposal goes very close to things like how. So and we only do what. So unless we found only what that's very useful, then the proposal will clearly not pass the steering committee. If it includes how, that has to go. And one of the first things that happened on contribution process is we had issues opened with suggestions for how. how to make judgments about the implementation of contribution.
Because it's how the developers understand.
Because it's how the developers understand it.
Inside the developers project.
Yeah.
And that's a very small detail that people can see about this contribution controversy. See, the very basic simple things about startup contribution. If you're looking for working with AOSP or Google, you need a CLA, common license agreement. You need to sign it as a company or as an individual contributor. But if you are working for a project, let's say Linux, you don't need to.
Yeah, just DCO.
Exactly. And then the both things are really effective for several level groups. The data is not a small word, it's really that level. So that's meaning that we are touching something that is very significant. And I don't think that is something that we are in our position to do that.
And of course, we have to understand that on the implementation side, there's a mature project to-do group that has plenty of guides and ideas. Kubota-san.
Yeah, I'm important as well. Because I'm not sure whether it's the right person to ask, but how do you intend to use it with supply chain?
No, exactly. This touches on the contract point and the like responsibility point. If this is a specification, specifications are usually about having a predictable deliverable. So who's the customer? And this is the point that if we did a contribution specification, that's contribution. So is the customer the project? Why does the project? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So, I mean, one argument to say that it might be useful is that perhaps customer companies would be interested in their suppliers having a framework for contribution to know that the supplier has a framework for deciding what intellectual property to put outside, just to know that the supplier company has a framework for understanding IP transfer. But equally, there's another argument that that's not a really important question for the supply chain customer. So, this is precisely one topic to discuss. And if it's not supply chain optimization, not trust in the supply chain, then it's not our job.
Once created this distribution, it will be keep longer than the guidelines.
Yes.
And instance, so in this contribution, it is upstream. Same context will be
Exactly.
equal to the specification, or so we want to modify according to the change of the circumstances or business situations.
You're quite right. Unless we could find something universal and long-term about contribution, then we couldn't make a specification about that. If it's something that changes, then it belongs in a reference guide or reference document. And if it's something that's normative, something about how, then it probably belongs in to-do group. So in other words, the discussion is really, is there something for us to do here?
I'm so sorry because our company made a longer life cycle project.
No, absolutely.
If we use the word specification, it'll be longer, 10 years or 20 years or something.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's completely what is understanding of what is specification.
Yes, yes. No, you're quite right. A specification is intended to have a long life, and an ISO standard has a very long life. So that's a huge responsibility for a proposal to transfer. And that's why in OpenChain, nothing gets transferred until formal votes by steering a committee. Until that, it's just people making notes and ideas. Because we have a huge responsibility if we make any specification.
Maybe there's some people's, you look in the different way, not about contribution per se, the way that you see in there, but the fact that companies itself, some framework to allow contributions, not how to do contributions.
Yes.
Companies usually are lost to do it, so companies itself has all the time troubles to make everyone understand what is about the contribution and why you need to contribute to research, not how to contribute to open source.
So that's exactly what it was.
Yeah,
I thought that we just.
exactly. But the discussion is going the other way around.
Okay, all right.
That the people are looking for, not looking at the right point. So if you think about and helping make some way you can standardize easy after the companies contribute to open source. But how to do it and how to prevent the developers not touching, contributing, and being nothing there, then you have something to us.
Correct. Mary, you had something.
Yes, when you talk about supplier chain, then you think about if this is not in supply chain, then this is not in the open chain scope. But I would argue that this is much more bigger than supply chain. Because it's not, if we, if we,
Speak 100.
okay. If we think about the downstream and upstream, so contributing to upstream. Then the chain is like two upstream, this upstream software will be used by everyone. So this is chains, not only like, okay, I'm a worker, my supply chain is like open portion, open door like this. So this chain is like from here to here, then this is like broadcast to everyone. So in this case, I think this belongs to open chain scope. And my second point is contribution divided two parts. One is you upstream your code to the community. The other part is you create your own open source projects. Both need the license compliance and security compliance. So that's what I'm thinking. One benefit of having this standard is like we can reduce or make sure all the upstream software have the good quality.
Very weekend. You were talking about controlling developer programs, so this is not.
No, this can be like as a requirement. For example, what Chaos is doing, what OpenSSF is doing.
The 24/7 we can think we cannot control their whole development.
Cannot
You know,
control the code quality, that's
not
for sure.
that's the ones that it's not the institutions. And yes, you that's they try it. Companies try it for a long time. Also projects this we not and then you got a backslash even inside your companies and anything because developers really don't like this kind of thing. So don't try to touch this. You can, but you're not researching.
I'm thinking from this, the whole world of GitHub, all these public reports, how to reduce the rubbish.
Yes, then you have something called CRA. That's the European Union is just trying to do exactly this way, completely in a way that destroyed the entire ecosystem with the same similarity. Because they think they are doing better to control the rubbish and protect the companies. And now we'll be destroying the entire European ecosystem. Simple. One good intention you can destroy the industry.
So
These facts.
I can help with the scoping question and why. So obviously with open source, if you want to manage, let's say processes, it's a huge amount of processes you could manage. But when it comes to setting up a project, we always define what that project will do. We put a fence around it. And the project charter has that. So when OpenChain was established, it was given a project charter that limits our field of operation on purpose. So the OpenChain project charter is a software supply chain where open source is delivered with trusted and consistent compliance information. Anything outside of that, we don't do. And that doesn't mean it doesn't have to be done, but it means that our project's operational area is defined. And if there's something else that's really important to do, we can suggest that someone does it, but it's not our job to do it. And the reason for that is basically mission creep. That if we don't have a clear limitation on what a project's doing, it can end up doing many different things and become diffused. So, Mary, you're quite right that something like, let's say contribution is covering a huge amount of different ground. But if OpenChain looks at contribution, the only thing we are allowed to look at is in the context of a software supply chain. because that's our charter. The charter can be changed if the board meets and votes on it. But until the board meets and votes on it, that's all we do. And the other stuff we give to someone else. And that's to make sure that our project stays very focused. Otherwise, we'll end up doing many things and it would split too many opinions. So something like our proposal for the AI compliance, something like the proposal for contribution, something like the telco SBOM quality proposal, we have to read them against our charter, our vision, a software supply chain where open source is delivered with trusted and consistent compliance information. And if those proposals match that, the steering committee might vote yes. If the proposals do not match that, the steering committee cannot vote yes. So it's very clear where our boundaries are. And this also helps us judge a discussion. You know, if we're looking at the proposal for AI compliance, we read this and we can judge what we should talk about in AI compliance. We should talk about open AI compliance in potential, but we have no business talking about proprietary AI compliance. It's not our job. So contribution as well, does that discussion map onto software supply chain trusted and consistent compliance information? If yes, we can talk about those pieces. If no, then no. So this is very purposeful. Every project in Linux Foundation has a charter that limits their field of operation. And the member companies sign up to the charter, but no more. This is where we put very strong limits.
Question, what is the definition of the software, your software supply?
Yeah, that's a good question. We don't have a formal definition included in the charter of what the software supply chain is. So it's up to interpretation by the board and the Linux Foundation to interpret that if a question is raised on the specific limits. At this time, we haven't had a question raised because we've operated with the idea that the software supply chain we care about is business to business and internal business supply chains. That's what we've done in effect. But if it's raised to make a more formal definition of the software supply chain, the board would meet and discuss that and also check with Linux Foundation strategy department and do that. But my point there is that if something needs to be defined or redefined, we have to move that to a board discussion. It's not something that the community can do organically. We have 1,000 companies in our community. We don't have we couldn't have free form discussions to redefine the project mission or redefine our scope. But you know, it can be raised. For instance, you could formally ask OpenChain to define the software supply chain, and I'll take that to the next board meeting for the board to clarify the intent of software supply chain. I can tell you how we've operated until now: commercial supply chain, company to company, and then internal software supply chains. Big companies have many legal departments. In effect, transferring software between the different legal entities is very similar to different companies.
If we use open source in our product, will the open source community will be the supply chain also?
It's final upstream, but in our case, that final upstream is a starting point. It's not the key part of the supply chain that we're worried about in terms of the transactions on business to business. It's the beginning. Please.
Remember that we already lost this barrier about the commercial and the source part. Because at the point that we are reaching the level for OpenChain, it means that it is not becoming dependent of the commercial entities. We need to deal with this as well. So we will become responsible mainly even for the commercial parts.
Yep, definitely. One reason we have to be super careful and super conservative.
Yes,
Go ahead, yeah.
Sorry. No, just just tying it back to how I think about the contribution spec and why I think it's relevant to our vision and our mission here, and why it increases the security in the supply chain, or how I can trust the supply chain. If the contributions in a project that I'm gonna use, or that is used anywhere in my supply chain, either it's brought in by myself from the project, or it's brought in by a supplier of mine from the project, I want preferably to know that every corporate contributor to that project had the authorization from his company to actually contribute that. Otherwise, I see that as an IP risk. That if he has inserted code without having approval to do so, that's an IP risk for me. So having and I think I weren't part of OpenChain at the time, but I think that's why they have a contribution process is included in the 5230. That's why the section is included. I would think I weren't part at the time. Shane were, so perhaps you can enlighten us.
Yep, I
But
can.
I think fleshing that out is just fleshing out the trust in that part, so that I can then be more secure in that all the contributions that comes from corporate contributors have the necessary approvals for the transfer of that IP into that project, or the use of that IP in that project.
Maybe we are the wrong naming for the proposal. It's about contribution, not contribution process. Because this is what is leading everyone to think that we are touching those that we know. So you maybe it's likely changing the way that contribution for companies to allow this, then the history started to be.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's actually the point that I also wanted to stress out. So the all the proposals here, they're not contradictory to each other. It's just the perspective that you perceive. If you look into the supply chain, there's an incoming part and there's an outgoing part. So the contribution process in the form that is presented right now, with how I perceive it, is more on the outgoing. So this is defining the process and standards and practices for companies to establish a contributing to the outside. So the open source project, the like delivery to the other customers, and they're not matching the team, they're not matching the team. And this is how I would see it in example this way. So try not to create some policies and rules and samples in people that are coming from the open source community and contributing to your open source project, but rather tell to the companies how they can or shall establish a process for the outgoing.
Yeah.
And that fits quite well with the supply chain.
And this is, I think, exactly why OpenChain acts as a forum for these discussions, because when something is raised like this, because we have quite strict rules. Oh, Carl, I'll just finish this point on the rules. Because we've got quite strict rules about how we must observe something, and we insist on the high level, it allows us to keep pulling the conversation back to the overarching strategic approach in play. And this helps us to have a discussion and then decide if there's a reason for us to continue it or it belongs in a different area. So one reason we facilitate these discussions is precisely to tease out, is there a what for the software supply chain that we should operate in for trusted compliance information here? Or does this idea belong somewhere else? And that's a filter we have. And it's one reason that I think OpenChain has been useful, because most other projects are operating at a lower level, an implementation level. They already have made value judgments about items. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's a very different perspective to us. Sorry, Carl Eric.
Yeah, what you're touching upon is something I would call contribution policy. So that's why. And I would say that has nothing to do with what we're saying. Absolutely. That is something that belongs to do. But the problem with the to-do, they are mostly promoting best practices and the more best practices there are, the better. So that is kind of a drawback with the to-do group. They're not working like OpenChain in the specifications. I have tried to promote the contribution policy we implemented so mobile and now how we implement it local cars. And that means spreading to do but it never was cocked up, but it's just flopping around as a description. But it's never been, it's never been sent into, that is one recommendation how to do it. So the issue here is really, can we influence to do it to work OpenChain?
This is a good question. To-do group has immediately engaged with Anna taking lead on engagement with the contribution discussion. And I think one thing that came up was I guess the optics or the terms used, like you mentioned, outgoing.
Yes.
So, you know, to-do group very much belongs on the implementation choices, and that's not really our job. And I think the spirit of what Jimmy has raised on contribution is sort of focused on the outgoing.
Yes.
So, it's possible that this is an example, this isn't a suggestion, okay? But it's possible that our conversation would just be like, we need to rename this outgoing to capture the idea that we're talking about outgoing IP. And that helps to define what comments people have and what belongs in this discussion as we analyze it further as a proposal. Just
I can tell that properly in these companies will be able to start to make a lot of friends with developers and work within the community. Because if you understand how it's difficult for developers inside the company, you can't allow it to contribute. And if you make it this easier for them, you start to make a lot of friends. It's a good one.
And to Carl Eric's point, so OpenChain has a lot of reference material as well. Like we have a policy template and so on. But our policy template, there's no one from Denmark in the room, but nod to our Danish friends. Our policy template is Lego. And the idea is that people can look at it and put together reference policies with different scopes and blah, blah, blah. And our reference material is all public domain. There's no such thing as the finished OpenChain training slides or something like that. It's just there. And I think that sometimes stuff belongs in our reference material, perhaps sometimes stuff belongs in to-do group. But
How about I contribute? Contribution policy.
yeah, it's welcome to be part of our reference material. Yeah, this is
From what we have to do maybe it's to OpenChain as a reference.
there's about 1,000 documents in our reference material repo. So it's everything from like policy templates. Right now, I think we've got our reference policy in 3 languages. And then we also have community contributions where different companies sent in various examples. So yeah, no, absolutely. It's welcome in our reference library.
Super.
And this is maybe
Do a contribution.
a contribution about contribution. Good. And this is perhaps where we differ almost immediately from how projects. Our reference stuff is just stuff. And there's no such thing as the OpenChain policy. So this is where I think it's easier for us to host reference material than other people because we don't have like the OpenChain policy. On the other hand, our reference library, of course, means that it's only for reference. It's not going to make something for someone.
So one more comment on that with regards to contributions or outbound, whatever we decide to call it, that's a better framing. I think I'm stuck on contribution because that's the term we use internally. If that's not a good universal term, then we should definitely not use that. But besides that, I think and to Kalle's point, there's a difference also between the why. We're not telling you why. We're not telling you why it's a good idea to contribute to open source. We have the to-do group to do that. We're not telling you why it's a good idea to use open source. But assuming you think it is, then we have the license compliance. specification, assuming you think it's a good idea to start doing outbound open source, contribute code to projects, then we have the specification to tell you this is the inflection points you need. The what, not how you should do it. I mean, we can provide reference materials as examples of that, but we're just going to specify, assuming you have decided to do it, here's the what you need to do.
Can I just add another dimension to this? I do not have an opinion on whether you should add a contribution or not, but if you go down the path of contribution, I would encourage you to think about how that influences the downstream SMOM materials. Okay, so you have an opportunity. One of the problems I have being in the middle of the supply chain is, can I trust the SMOM I get upstream? In fact, the early days of OpenChain, before OpenChain started, I was talking about OpenChain. We got this SPDX document. We got it from somebody. How do we trust whether it's a good SBOM or not? We need to know what the process is. So now we're talking about producing process standards about reducing open source downstream. Maybe you could put a few sentences in there about making sure the SBOM is correct going downstream as well. So just something to think about if you do go create it, not just the process around the property, but also making sure that it's captured. So that those of us working on data, how the downstream.
Which, fits into the idea of going back to our charter, consistent compliance information, which is why our license standard, one of the key things says is have a software bill of materials. So yeah, no, absolutely. And capturing all of these ideas, I mean, whether, let's say we say we're discussing contribution or outgoing, capturing those ideas will eventually create a picture of what companies are thinking about when they think about this. And that'll help us to determine where this belongs. And I think OpenChain came out of the same process. As you said, we were saying, you were in the first discussions. It was like, we need some process thing. What do we need? It took a while, actually, about a year, I think, yeah. So for those of you who are new, this is situation normal in standardization. A lot of talking, a lot of different opinions, and then after a while, a formal process to decide if people proceed or not and how they proceed. And that's why we have a steering committee to make a very clear gateway of when these conversations transfer from, I guess in American English, the term would be spitballing, just talking, into being something more formal project activity. So right now, Telco has a pretty complete proposal from the Telco work group that now goes to the spec work group as a proposal. Contribution is a proposal in very early days of discussion. AI is a proposal that's in discussion about the proposal, where we're likely to have a study group. So these are all just things to talk about for the future. And we will be gatekeeping it. Just because this conversation happens doesn't mean it continues. And even if it's a really good idea, it doesn't mean it continues in OpenChain, regardless of what it is, whether it's telco spec, whether it's contribution, whether it's AI. We discuss if it's appropriate, what's appropriate, and then we see what we do. So as Gary said, it took about a year on licensing. And OpenChain is very conservative, especially now that we make ISO standards and we change the world's supply chain. To Tack's point, it's a huge responsibility. So we talk, we record it, but then we have a gateway to decide what we really do. Just to be super clear, no one should make assumptions that we're going to make a lot of different standards. We're talking about, do we want to make more standards or not? And the community has a voice, but that voice is only collected over time, and then it's presented to a steering committee that decides if that will become a project position. Okay, so it's a long process. OpenChain doesn't just start a new standard out of thin air. just to be very clear. And if you want to see it,
Right.
on our FAQ on our website, it shows you the formal process for proposing and developing standards. So for instance, the contribution spec started day one. Now it's at day one with a kickoff call that says the community is talking about this. And then there's a sequence of actions, steering committee, cooling off period, comments period, all before this thing could possibly be a spec. Telco has completed something in a work group that now goes to a kickoff call for the general community and then goes through a whole process of discussion to decide, is this a bigger, like a universal spec? AI will be study group. And if the study group defines the problem, there'll be a kickoff call and again a sequence. But today, there are no new OpenChain standards. There's no new specifications. There's just proposals. To be absolutely clear, we're talking about whether we continue talking about this stuff. And the community gets a chance to talk because this is an open source style project. But that's all we're doing. And there is a formal process to decide if it goes further. And there's a huge step from community talking to ISO standard. There's a huge step from community talking to OpenChain standard. So it's a very long process. Community talking, gateways, OpenChain specification, gateways, ISO specification. It takes years on purpose. All right, we've been an hour, 45 minutes. Let's take a 30-minute break. No more specifications. We're talking about automation in 30 minutes. All right, let's finish here, come back at 11:15, and then we'll continue from 11:15 to about 11:45.
That's the framework. Are you right?
Yeah.
Oh.
So we're just about to restart the event.
You can use it quite language, I guess. But it's,
Everyone, let's convene. We're gonna restart. We're okay, everyone. Let's restart and focus on an automation discussion. We're gonna keep this short, even though it's a big topic. I'd like to finish before 12. So we're now at 11:20. And the reason we're having an automation discussion is twofold. The first part is a recap of the work. The tooling group has been operational for quite a few years, and it has done various things. Recently, it has been focused on describing tooling capabilities. So making a map of tooling capabilities. And the idea of the map was that you could look at any tool and see which parts of the map it would reach. However, recently our automation work group has basically stopped. People are not turning up at the meetings. So we're going to do two things. We're going to look at the capabilities map, and we're going to talk about the future. On the Zoom call, you can, I believe, see the capabilities map if you are on the Zoom call. Let me share that. So if you're on the Zoom call, you can see the capabilities map, and that's an outcome of the tooling group in the last half year or so. And it covers things like having package crawlers, dependency analyzers, metadata repository, and so on. And just imagine that the concept is that if you take any tool in the world, you can see which parts of this capabilities map it covers. And this allows you to judge the tools versus, just reading the tool's own description of itself. So you can easily compare multiple different tools with the capabilities map in theory. However, what we don't have yet is an implementation of the capabilities map with multiple tools described against it. There's a few tools, but only a few. And I think this is something Max and I touched on. The capabilities map is not necessarily universally accepted as a singular solution for tooling. It's one proposal for how to map capabilities, but there are other perspectives possible. Is that a good way to describe it?
Yeah, I think it's a modular view, but how stuff is cut and what interacts with which box, I think there are other views, other ideas that not all of them are easy to map or can be completely mapped to this capabilities map.
Yeah.
It's a rather complete and good view, but it's not universal, I would say.
So we could run with it's something. It's something which can help with analysis, but there's maybe two steps. One, people to use it and map tools against it, and two, to discuss what might be more universal in the future. So what we have with the capabilities map is, and this is a joke, okay? This is a joke. It's definitely not a standard. It's a model which could be useful. But one thing that's our challenge is that the tooling work group, since making this map, has run out of momentum. So the meetings have very few attendees, and we just haven't seen development further than this. And that leads to an interesting question. Automation is very important for implementation, which is one reason we've supported the idea of an automation work group. But remember, implementation is how, right? So it's not core to our mission. We just regard it as an education space, a reference space. This reference space is currently in effect, not functioning. It's just not meeting. So the question is, what do we do? It's not core to us, but obviously there's use in understanding automation that's critical. The implementation of business processes and software bill of materials. And how do we go to a next step? For those of you who don't know, there used to be a Linux Foundation project called ACT, Automated Compliance Tooling. And honestly, we in OpenChain sort of expected ACT to become the center of gravity for open source tooling for open source compliance. But for one reason or another, the ACT project seems to have run out of momentum. I mean, if you look at the sort of discussions we had before, it was like when ACT really gets going, then probably the tooling work group belongs under ACT, where all the tooling stuff will be done and it will be funded and blah, blah, blah. But ACT hasn't happened.
It's happened for a while.
And then
Yeah.
it unhappened. But yeah,
We still need that on it. It's a nice community, but we don't have an official charter. So.
that's a really good way of putting it. It's sort of run out of gas in the scaling, but it still has a community. Yeah. So there's value then in automation. There's people interested, but there isn't a center for people to meet and share. Our tooling work.
Let me test that if you mind.
No, go for it. This is
Between 4 and 10 different tooling groups that are doing very similar things. So that may be why we keep running out of gas, is people that are interested in these communities, their time gets split between these different ones. So there's a CISA tooling work group, which is set around SBOMs, but the nice thing is it covers both CycleDX and SPDX. So it's neutral. SPDX has a tooling work group, which is pretty active. We meet every other Thursday, and that one actually has momentum going. That's kind of where the ACT group
it went.
So they're actually, we meet every other week. Now it's a little bit more ad hoc. Is it as normal? We start the agenda with, okay, what are the issues we want to talk about today? All the tooling, open source tooling maintainers can get together and share best practices. I might do this one. There is an open SSF, 2 open SSF groups I'm aware of that deal with tooling as it relates to supply chain. And I'm sure there's more than that. First, the ones that you mentioned, the OpenChain.
Right.
And ones that I've been involved. So
Wow.
So it's not like there isn't a place to go. It's kind of like choosing which. Oh, we can start another one.
Too many standards. Let's make another standard. That's a really good point. Maybe there's too many venues.
Also, to add to that, there are some tools that are by itself trying to capture the whole ecosystem or trying to build the whole pipeline, which are additionally to these work groups.
Yes.
There's no problem to have too many tools, as long as that they provide exactly the same content in the end.
Yeah.
So the thing is that why we have 20 different applications that generate SPDX and no one of them generate exactly the same SPDX that's valid. So they are doing exactly the same. So we are not looking at the right place. Again, repeatedly succeed. Everyone was enforced the last time that Philippe from Stanford made the big meeting there, that he had a lot of guys that were the development area, and the amount of tools in the big business is exactly this thing. For example, how many tools are doing exactly the same thing, but the end result is not the same?
Right.
So I really don't get that. I will not complain about having 10 applications generating SPDX, as long as the end goal is the same. Everyone uses the valid, it's okay for me. That's so the goal is exactly the end product, the byproduct, not the tool itself. Not complain about the tens of thousands of tools, but the content need to be something specific.
I have one more question to that. In addition to the feedback, that is I call it quality of stuff. Does it contain enough stuff, right? Or is it like really super minimal and useless as stuff? So it's both valid and yes, need to be and we have no way of measuring these. Yeah.
Telco.
Well, isn't there an SBOM scorecard?
Was that
Isn't there an SBOM scorecard?
Yeah. There are some tools that calculate the values.
scores, yeah, Yeah.
There are several, one for people.
yes, yes.
Again, calculated by their measures. It's not calculated for something that is standardized. So this is meaning that the score is valid for what? For their pages. This is the point. If we don't have a glue, a thing that you can validate everything, and you cannot create scores, you cannot create maps, you cannot create anything because everyone do themselves. Everyone decide to do anything.
But there are so many choices that can be made or opinions you can have when you create an SBOM or something. How do you represent stuff? How deep do you go? What information do you capture? Do you capture the tree or just a flat list of dependencies? And many choices. And I think it's valid that tools have different opinions and different choices. I wouldn't say that every tool that analyzes a Python project needs to come up with exactly the same file. And if it goes bigger, if you analyze the whole container image, it just gets exponentially more complex and more ways to differentiate. And I think it's okay that tools make different choices, but I just from looking at the tool, I have no easy way to understand what are the choices. How deep does it go? It just says I produce SBOM type X, and I'm this checks your checkbox, but the deeper comparison is very hard.
One possible solution to that is borrow the SPDX3 profiles forward, right? So you guys are all familiar with profiles, so we were just talking about maybe this telco thing should be a profile because it specifies the minimum requirements, right? So if I need this profile, I have these as minimums, and you can create it in the telco space. There's no reason you can't, say that this SPDX 2.3 is supporting this profile.
Right.
That way, it's not in spec yet, but you can still use that as a way of communicating, this is what I'm intending to produce,
But profiles are helpful, but cannot accomplish all the requirements. Like if you have the requirement if you analyze a Docker image and you find a package, please list its transitive build dependencies, which is a requirement that some might have and which cannot be encoded in a model, in the model or in SPDX, and it's also very hard to understand if a tool does that or doesn't do that, or how it does that.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the same thing.
And
Yeah. But at a minimum, on the verification, it doesn't go through the online verifying for SPDX. Don't claim you support it. That would be like a really simple thing. If somebody could go through all the SPDX tools, let's say they support SPDX and run it through the verifier, and we can flag. I think that might
You are jumping in already on the SPDX. To reach the level of SPDX, you need something that generates information about the components way before. So that's why we have plenty of people doing a different way. So with this, we don't have a minimal requirements, minimal specification requirements to reach minimal good SPDX or technology X, whatever is from the need.
Yeah.
So we need to specify in the way that the tools can generate very good data and let them do their way to do it. But the minimum says at least you expect this to reach in the end goal with very good as well.
Yeah, but isn't that more the profile than the issues to go in it or cover?
Kind of. It's more of a foundation, there are very little restrictions, so, but it's really more of the upper level profiles, like licensing profile. If you want to have a minimal set of fields to be able to do licensing compliance, you want to comply with licensing profiles, similar with security or build, you want verified. So,
But if you know, on the other hand, if you don't supply everything that you can core profile, then you're
totally out. Yeah, there's not.
So it's minimal.
That's right.
Yeah. And then because the tools can be very, very valid because some they can decide it by themselves that they store for the minimum is a low scorecard, but they reach the next, it's high scorecard. And then the two comes very, very good. Because we know where the origin of things, we know the minimum specification, then we have something existing.
There one more thing out on the minimal side is we do have better validators for the NTIA, and that's online too. So you can have a valid SPDX document, but it doesn't meet the minimum requirements. But we have another checker, another drop down list on tools. You say, is it just to be minimal? Minimum is like, okay, that's the validation, minimum, what you guys want. So there's still some gaps, or maybe there's just a telco. Like, here you go.
Barry, you're saying?
Yeah, I'm very tired now, but anyway, the minimum of the requirement of state.
I'm sorry, can you speak up a little?
Okay, I'm just wondering similar stuff before the rest racking fact. The SPDX profile have nowadays license part, security part, the AI part, then you have extended to the safety part and also the testers, many stuff here. For each areas, is there any kind of similar but mandatory areas, mandatory parameters or metadata, then optional? So all the company for this, this is mandatory, everyone needs to do, and all the tooling later on will come
Yes.
match with your standard.
Yes.
So this kind of mandatory field, is that standard is in SPDX standard or OpenChain standard?
The mandatory is SPDX.
Okay.
That's the,
Yeah,
And it could be a relation. It depends
oh, yeah,
on, like if we do the telco.
absolutely.
Telco process that says that you have to have this information. We could have a matching telco SPDX profile.
Yep.
That is exactly the same minimum requirements, and that would make the tooling so easy. The way the validator is going to work on 3.0 is I ingest an SPDX document. It'll tell me what profiles it claims to support, and I'll check the minimum fields for every one of those to make sure it complies. And I'll claim it if it does.
yeah. And also for the, maybe that's not that big, but anyway, for the SPDX files, you always have some common stuff, like say your component, your software package and the URL and the stuff. Then based on this, you have this license information, security information, AI information, safety information. How can it be like both machine readable and for human beings? So it's like clear, right? This is the common stuff. Okay, I just check compliance, ticked, license ticked, then safety done. This is a very both machine readable and human being readable.
Yeah.
So you always need to check when your supplier deliver you SBOM, how do you verify it?
Yeah, I think the only way to be sure for the full spec is to have a machine verification. You know, because it's complicated enough. I don't think a human can keep up with all the requirements.
Many information there. Yes.
But having a human readable form, we're actually debating that right now. What do we do about it? Because, you know, when you add all these profiles and all the, you know, if you go into a single profile, it can look very simple. But if you add all the profiles together, it can be very complex. So how do you make that?
I just opened one of my SPDX files with JSON XML, which we
XML,
yes, but still, like you cannot distinguish which area, not like the human being, just the area divided.
Yeah.
I think that's an improvement.
Now, because there's so much to cover here, and discoverability seems to be a key issue, and not in the SBOMs per se, discoverability of the groups. Who's doing what? You mentioned like 5 or 6 groups that are meeting. And maybe this is my proposal for us, that maybe we change OpenChain's work on automation from a work group into a study group, which meets less frequently. And we basically talk about what's the current state of open source tooling for open source compliance, which would include saying, who on earth is meeting and talking about this stuff? And then we think about what can OpenChain do as a high level project to help. So one thing that came up as Gary was talking to Mark at 10, what if the telco work can fit into an SPDX profile, which isn't unheard of. The Japan group made SPDX Lite. Stuff from OpenChain has gone into SPDX, and what they do informs us. So we're looking at avenues for cooperation. So maybe we can have a study group to try to map out what work groups are out there, who's doing stuff, and then what can we do? What have we got? Like, for instance, does the telco SBOM quality potentially fit in? And as Gary mentioned, what if there was like, this isn't a proposal, this is just modeling, SPDX core, then you've got like NTIA minimum, then you've got SPDX Lite, maybe you've got telco, and you've got these different layers. And those are start and stop points for companies to determine quality, which might assist in companies not randomly picking fields and saying, this is what I want. So you'd know your incoming is SPDX Lite request, or your incoming is NTIA minimum request, or your incoming is the telco. So, we're looking at ways that very complex combinations of data, as Mary said, no longer really human readable, except in theory, can be sliced into requirements that companies would ask for in the supply chain.
I'd like to in a different direction.
What?
Because one of the things that we have some tools, we have many different regulations about SBOM. What we don't have is useful ways of using them. And I think it would be good if we could just talk about this is what each member company is trying to do to automate the use. This is what we've got, how we've tried it, this example things that we set up, this is what's working, what isn't. And share some of that out. Because at the moment I see some tools and no clear ways of how to connect
How to do it.
process having something that is actually automatic, as opposed to requiring a manual intervention of almost everything is there.
That is good. I'm just adding to the slide. Yeah. I mean, how I had on the slide, how do we support knowledge around open source compliance tooling in general, but maybe open source SBOM or open source implementation, as well as the tooling, right? How do you use this? What case studies are there? That actually doesn't exist.
I mean,
Yeah.
You brought case studies into this third meeting, because we're all maintainers, we're all tools providers. And, the more information we have on how it's used, it's good. Yeah.
I think it's Wednesday.
What's that? Wednesday?
Yep.
Oh, they did the wrong day. Wednesday. Is it Wednesday? Okay, Wednesday.
Thursday is civilization meeting.
Yeah. You're right. You're right. I was confusing me too. I mean, the example I keep on coming back to is you've got pathology, which is a great open source tool for doing a scan, looking at the latency you found and making a decision about what latency actually applies. And you have Orc, which is a great open source tool for putting into a pipeline with YAML curation about which flash you really want to have. How do those two connect?
Yeah. Actually, I just finished an analysis for the Linux Foundation for their internal state, and I looked at a bunch of open source tools, trying to decide how they all fit together. So, I can certainly share some of that, and with permission. I would think that's a problem. I guess that's fine.
Yeah. Dolan, our universal gateway. He must have 3,000 unread emails. We all just sent him requests. That's a really good point. The implementation and case studies. So it sounds like we might have a contribution to make on the strategic level and help map people so they can find out who's doing implementation, who's talking technical, and what type of material can help people answer the question of, okay, I can see I've got tools and SBOMs. Now what? What have people done? What's the institutional knowledge out there? So, yeah.
The other thing I was mentioning, if you're interested, this is SPDX specific, so keep that in mind. But I'll paste the link
Into the chat.
So.
Great.
Especially since I can use which day it was. And if you're interested in any of the meetings, there is a GitHub page with all of the SPDX meeting information. You'll see part of that.
pretty simple, and it is every Wednesday. Out of them, very convenient. Not survival. I think it's right. Even more convenient for me.
A question regarding the proposal that was had is that I think the initial mission of this tooling working group was to bridge all the gaps, to get the tools
And-
together and to integrate them and to help others to or to solve this issue once so that others can benefit from that, and the we move towards this universal or we bridge the gaps between the puzzle pieces. And it sounds like that this is no longer than part of the mission statement if it's research, so it's moving away from that initial goal.
I would bear in mind I'm Irish. I'm about to say things bluntly. I would say original mission has failed. It
Yeah.
just didn't happen.
Yeah.
And we need to do a reassessment strategically about what's going on in the market, because the initial implementation goal, brilliant, we all need it, but didn't happen. So I'd say original mission has failed.
Mm.
Doesn't mean it can't come back, but we've failed to reboot the tooling work group with its current format. So Max, I'd say we probably need to pull back, look at the landscape of where it is today, look at the institutional knowledge, and with that strategy, then talk about what's the possible implementation again.
Yeah.
Which is kind of blunt way of saying, I think we need a really hard reboot on this,
Mhm.
but it's not because the original idea was bad. It just didn't happen at that time.
The original idea, not originally itself, started as
There you go.
companies trying to
Got
get
the
at
link.
doing things.
Yeah.
Then we try to create some freedom. And only very most of the time there. But yes, it's become to be again, we don't have a proper definition.
I think the problem is that the green doesn't get itself developed anymore. Therefore, there isn't the resource to implement what is needed. Not enough.
Yeah.
One dimension to this is that the idea of bridging the gaps implies that we knew the gaps. I think the tuning
Ah.
group understood that. When you look at the capabilities of that, this is like 23 pages of requirements and components and parts, which are for most of it internal processes, which in terms of OpenChain is not really what OpenChain regards the result, like we're discussing here, because PDFs and profiles. Tell me what the result should be, or here, like I said, the tools come to different conclusions, or make the conclusion the same, or the form. And the tooling group learned that to get there, the process becomes so diverse, that we have so many theoretical now, changeable components, bridging the gaps between those becomes near impossible.
Which is, I think you put it well, Julian. The assessment of the complexity perhaps indicates we don't know what gaps to fill. So that means we need to take a breath. For those on Zoom, I'm about to run through the full tooling capabilities map as an indication of how complex the challenge is. So you can see the overview. And now I'll just run through how each of those parts was described. So it's like page after page after page after page after page after page of descriptions of challenge. And then after a while, it goes into trying to map some tools against the capabilities map, a handful of examples. All of this is potentially useful information, but we didn't hit the jackpot on solution. So yeah, strategy, back to strategy, and then implementation. Sounds sensible. We were very lucky with this tooling work group that got together, and these people who were solving problems shared so much information. But we need to get that energy again, because they're not coming to the table now. And especially new stuff is coming up, like out of Asia, Foslight in Korea, released by LG, this ecosystem with companies building around it. We've got almost zero insight into details of momentum there.
So one thing I can share with the group, this is from the CISA. They've selected, their own.
Oh, we're leaving in a few minutes.
Okay, so let's get into the CIB.
Both SPDS on DS, they have a slightly different way of cutting it, it's a little coarser. They talk about they have like 4 categories or 3 categories: produce, consume, translate, dictate.
Yes.
And each of those, it breaks down into like 3 subcategories. You got this little dimensional matrix in there. But I'll paste the document. I think it's public for everybody to read. And let me know if you can actually access that change.
I'll just open the
It's
document.
in progress, and people can, comment and add their own tools, and I think that's why it's probably a little more complete than some of the other capability matrices. Also, if you want the SPDS, we try to keep our website up to date. So you can go to the tools section, and we have breaking up between commercial, open source, and then the tools we maintain ourselves. Oh, looks like you got it.
I got it. Everyone can get in. That's brilliant. So, I mean, that's really useful. Yep. There's so much going on out there, so much work. We probably need to take a breath and assess that work, and then assess what we can do with our very high level strategy. And especially if we can get more people back to the table, like this is kind of, I think, to your point, Max, and Helio's point, more of the experts back to the table to guide us on the very practical level and help us filter through what's going on. I mean, if someone says, I love what's going on the SPDX work groups, that's giving us material, that's helping companies implement, but work group XYZ over here seems theoretical, it's not implementation helpful, then every time a company is saying, I want to implement automation for ISO 5230, we're able to say, well, that work group is focused on automation a lot, implementation a lot. Go there, have a look. Maybe we can do that rather than having another work group that isn't meeting much because everyone is in other work groups. All right, guys, that's it. We're gonna wrap up here. We had more material, but we've got too much going on, and it's time for us to take a breath and take what we've done and implement that. So we've gone through that there are proposals for new specs. We've reiterated that those proposals are just proposals. Doesn't mean the community has to agree. The whole purpose is to talk about it. Then that goes to steering committees and blah, blah, blah. It takes ages. On tooling, we had a tooling work group that's done some tremendous work, but it hasn't reached the full scope of its original vision. And there's many reasons for that, but I think Julian hit the nail on the head. Finding the gaps to fill for an end-to-end solution has been much more complex than we thought. So we haven't got there. So let's pull back, look at where the market is, and try to make a high-level map. And with that, I say, is there any other business that people want to raise?
So it occurred to me this morning, since Marion just gave a presentation yesterday, which kicked off a conversation about open source champion, phrase you used, wasn't it?
Yes.
I was thinking, I mean, we have a similar concept as an ADI, and I was thinking it's probably a good idea to share some information about the scope of that kind of role, so that other people who are interested in doing that kind of thing have some basis for it.
This is great. That's such a good point, and great. I'm so glad you raised this, Steve. Open source champions are a way to embed responsibility across an org. So you don't need a big OSPO, you don't need IP to do all the heavy lifting. In each department, there's a person who is named as responsible for helping apply your process and policy. So Amazon used it to great effect to essentially have a small OSPO, but extensive resources implementing policy. It's like 200 people or something in Amazon, right? That are champions. So in each department, they're responsible for making sure the open source stuff happens. And Volvo's setting that up as well. But it's right. That's brilliant. So, but it's new, right? We really haven't had information about this in the ecosystem as a distributed process implementation methodology. Stephen, that's well taken on board. Maybe that's something we expand on. No one else is currently doing that. Maybe we can add that to reference material. And no doubt something like To-Do Group could go into a lot more detail about how you implement it. but we could flag it exists and maybe point at slides from Nithya at Amazon or Mary at Volvo and so on. All right. Good other business. Final thing, thank you very much, Open Euler, for hosting us. Susie here is representing Open Euler's marketing and so on, and King is hiding in the background and making everyone do stuff. Yes, thank you for this room. It was so useful. We couldn't do Monday because we would have overlapped with SPDX Mini-Summit. So without this room, without Open Euler helping us, we wouldn't have had this Mini-Summit where I think we got a lot done. So big thank you. All right, everyone, go home. Goodbye.